I hope you guys get a kick out of that video. I love that thing. It makes me laugh so much every single time I see it. I knew that social media was good for something, so that's where I saw it the first time it was on social media. It's funny. So Greg talked last week about the fact that trials can actually be a good thing, right? They can actually be something that provides us with security. And that may seem a little bit odd, a little bit strange, but I mean, come on, we all know that difficult times are going to come, and in fact, for you, they may already be here. But there is a tremendous amount of security in knowing that Jesus knows what we're going through, and that he knows, he sees what the end result is going to be. In particular, especially like if we lean into him during those times when we don't see the whole picture, when we don't know how things are going to turn out, when, to be quite honest, it doesn't seem like it is going to be okay. I mean, like, think about it. Have you ever had to brace for something that you knew was going to hit you? Maybe figuratively, but in this case, I'm thinking literally. Have you ever had to brace for something that you knew was going to hit you, but there was just no way you were going to be able to get out of the way of it in time? So one time when I was a teenager, probably like late middle school type of age, I think somewhere around there, I was at a high school football game, and I was, of course, like, not doing the thing like where you sit in the stands with your parents and actually watch the game. I don't know if anybody did that when they were young, but I was out messing around with my friends. We were probably playing football, just goofing off, doing all kinds of things. Well, we were also doing this thing where one person lays down on the ground on their back and they put their feet up in the air, and then another person sits on their feet and they just launch you up into the air. Anybody ever try this before? Yeah, I don't recommend it. These are the kinds of things that we did for fun before, video games were a big part of our life, I guess. And so anyway, and it seemed like fun right up until the point that I was flying through the air and starting to rotate a little bit forward, and there was no way that I was going to be able to stop what was happening. See, I could see the ground coming, but in case you have any idea what gravity means and how that works, I couldn't do anything to stop the ground from getting closer and closer and closer to me. So I learned some really important lessons that day, some things about, doing silly things where you could potentially hurt yourself. I also got to ride in an ambulance that day, so that was kind of cool. Sadly, that was not the first time that I got to ride in an ambulance, but I remember flying through the air, and I remember my mother standing over me, and the ambulance was already there. That's what I remember. I don't know what happened in between that time. But look, I know that sometimes life feels this way, right? Like all you can do is brace for impact. I don't know if you've ever been there. I'm sure that you have. So how do we buckle up? How do we make sure that we are ready for difficult times so that they actually do turn out to be moments that strengthen us and not ones that break us down? How do we make sure that they are moments that reinforce our relationship with God and they drive us to follow Jesus more deeply and more securely and not cause us to try to attack life without him, right? Well, let's take a look at what Peter had to say next to the Jesus followers that had been scattered, as Greg told us about last week. In verse 13, he says, "Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober." He tells them to prepare their minds for action, to be alert and sober of mind. And Peter, interestingly enough, actually connects the idea of not being drunk to spiritual practices. And maybe that seems kind of strange. Like, what could possibly be bad about things that we consider to be spiritual? But he is quite literally saying, don't become drunk with things that we consider to be spiritual. Even that can be an issue. We need to be alert, and we need to be seeing things clearly in order to evaluate situations correctly. And we should be careful not to let our minds become intoxicated by any and all of the influences that are around us, right? And when we hear that word intoxicated, immediately I think most of our minds go to a certain types of things. Yes, alcohol, drugs, those kinds of things can intoxicate, but they are not the only things that can intoxicate and cloud our judgment, are they? No, politics and current events can intoxicate. Debates over theology and personal values and beliefs can intoxicate and cloud our judgment. Anger, rage, frustration, they can intoxicate in pleasure. Pleasure can intoxicate and cloud our judgment. And this reference here is also likely a reference to when Jesus told his followers to be dressed for action or to be ready for service, something that Luke recorded in chapter 12 of his gospel letter. You can see that there. Peter uses basically the same phrasing here in this passage. Essentially, Peter was telling them to brace for impact. It's coming, right? Trials are going to come. Intoxicating influences are going to come. Put your seatbelts on. He probably wasn't talking about seatbelts because they hadn't been invented yet. But the idea, the concept is very similar. And then to finish verse 13, he tells them, therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. He says to hope fully, not hopefully, but to hope fully. To set your hope means to fix your hope completely, not partially, not somewhat, not, put a little bit of hope into Jesus and all of that, but then maybe hedge your bets a little bit and put some into some other things and some other people. No, he says to affix or to attach your hope for today, for tomorrow, for all of the future to the grace that will come when Jesus returns. And remember, in order to be able to hope fully, you need to be alert and sober of mind. These things work together. That's what allows you to be able to fix your hope on Jesus and the grace that is coming when he returns, and to not get beat down, to not get worn out by all the stuff that is going on around us, to not doubt that he actually has all of this under control, to not be consumed by fear and by worry and by anxiousness, much like a seatbelt does. Being strapped into Jesus, placing our hope and our confidence in what he is capable of and not what we are able to control, or in most cases not control, that is real security. And this hope that we have is not something that comes without evidence, right? The word therefore at the beginning of this sentence, it means that because of all the stuff that Greg talked about last week. So if you were here last week, or if you weren't, let's cover that, right? All the stuff that Greg talked about last week. Since God chose you in verse 1 of this book, since God saved you through the resurrection in verse 3, since God has brought you into an inheritance that won't perish, won't spoil, won't fade in verse 4, since God is protecting you in verse 5, since God is refining your faith in verses 6 and 7, and since your faith is able to produce an unexplainable joy in verse 8. For this reason, hope fully in the undeserved favor that will be fully realized when Jesus returns. And then he says, look, now that you know all of this, you can't continue to live like you don't know. Once you know, you can't unknow. In verse 14, he says, as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. Since you know that what God has done, and you know that he has done all those things that Greg talked about last week, and you know that obeying him and following his will is clearly best. It's the only way to security, to hope, to joy. And you can't act as though you don't know. Essentially, Peter says, look, I've just told you something that should give you a tremendous amount of comfort. But now that you know it, you can't unknow it. And this knowledge should affect the way you live your life. Because everything that Peter has written up to this point is setting up the reason that he was writing to the Jesus followers that had been scattered all over Asia Minor. Before he gets into the very practical nitty-gritty, which he's going to do, the instructions that he's been given for how Jesus followers ought to live, he wants a few things to be clear. He wants it to be clear, first of all, you're not doing this for me. It's not for me. Don't, start to live a certain life, behave a certain way because I said so, right? In fact, the statement as obedient children, right? A lot of times we will hone in on that word obedient. But this statement is not an assumption of behavior. It is an assumption of a positional truth. They are children as a result of their salvation, as a result of their trust in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. He wants them to understand that they should obey, yes. A Jesus follower should behave in a certain way as a celebration of what Jesus has done and of what God has promised as a result of their secure position as children in the family. To put it another way, results don't define the relationship. Rules don't define the relationship. The relationship defines the rules. You don't make rules for other people's children, do you? I mean, maybe sometimes you wish you could. You think, I'd like to make a few rules for those kids. That'd be great. But you don't make rules for other people's children. You make rules for your children. Why? Hopefully, it's quite simple. Because they are your children. Well, you don't keep the rules in order to be in the family. That's not how family works. You are in the family. Yes, there are rules, but that is not what makes you a part of the family. And this is an important thing, I think, to make sure that we state before we go into the next verse and we look at some of the characteristics that Peter says ought to be true of Jesus' followers, someone that is in this family. In fact, in verse 17, when Peter says that they call on God as Father, this is another statement confirming that he is talking to people that are in the family already. Essentially, he's calling a family meeting. I don't know if you've ever had to do that or not, but that's what Peter's doing here. So let's look at some of Peter's instruction to these scattered Jesus followers. In verses 15 and 16, he says, "But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, 'Be holy because I am holy.'" He says, don't conform to the evil desires that you had when you didn't know any better. And he says this phrasing almost exactly the same way that Paul says it in Romans chapter 12. Don't conform to the desires that you had when you didn't know any better, but instead be holy. If you stop letting yourself be driven by and your actions be dictated by the things of the world and its way of doing things, then you can pursue holiness. And this, to be very clear, is not a call to perfection. Peter is not calling us to some thing that he knows we will not be able to do. But as people drawn into a special and unique relationship with God, we are to reflect his character. We are image bearers of his, and we are to reflect his character. And one of those attributes is his holiness. But why? Why does Peter say that we should do this? Well, Peter actually gives us a reason, a really good reason, to not conform to the world's way of doing things. And I think that it is often overlooked in this next verse because there's a lot of really important things that are being said here. And this is something that I think gets easily missed. In verse 18, he says, "For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver and gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors." And did you catch it? Did you catch the reason that he gives to not conform to the world's way of doing things? Let's take a look at it again. "For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life that was handed down to you." Okay. That one stings a little bit Maybe that hurts just a little bit, but let's be honest. We know this, right? We know. We know that it is an empty way of life. Chasing after money, fame, possessions, they don't fulfill the way we expect, and they just don't last. I mean, think about this, right? And this may not be surprising to you. Maybe you've heard this before, but 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt often 3 to 5 years after winning the lottery. After winning hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, tens of millions of dollars, bankrupt within 3 to 5 years. And 78% of professional athletes go broke, many within 3 years of retiring from their respective leagues. Like, those are things that just baffle me. Kind of hard to really understand that. But look, this is not just true of rich people, right? People who kind of maybe suddenly come into generational wealth. I mean, how many times have you thought some new thing was really going to make you happy, and then it didn't? Or maybe it did for a little bit, but it didn't last, right? I mean, you were really looking forward to that new phone, that new TV, that new computer, that new iPad, some new piece of technology, but then within a year or so, everybody seems to have a newer, better one, right? And yours is like, it's barely 2 years old, but it just feels old and tired and busted. It's like not cool anymore. It just doesn't last. Or how many times have you thought, you know what? I'm going to give that person a piece of my mind. You're telling them off, that'll make me feel better. Just making sure that I tell them how stupid and awful I think their point of view is, man, that'll make me feel better. Does it? I mean, does it? And maybe for a minute, but after you do that, are you able to then go the rest of your life, the rest of your week? I mean, honestly, are you able to even go the rest of the day without having to tell another person off in order to kind of make yourself feel better? It is an empty and unsatisfying way to live. But the beauty of it is, the beautiful thing about it is Peter says, that is not the stuff that redeemed you, that is not what makes you who you are, and you don't have to live like that anymore. I mean, back before you knew any better, the only thing that made sense was to live that way. But now you know that it's empty. So don't live that way anymore. And we weren't redeemed by perishable things that are hollow and empty. No, verse 19 tells us how we were redeemed. But with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. An inheritance that will never perish, spoil, or fade, paid for with a resource that never loses its value. Christ's payment method, his life, it is recession-proof, it is inflation-proof, a banking collapse can't affect it. Nothing can ever diminish the value or the effect of what he did. And then Peter gives kind of a final encouragement to sort of wrap up this opening part of his letter. In verse 22, he says, now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. He says that what purifies us is obeying or acting on the truth of the resurrection of Jesus that changed their lives. This was fresh in their minds. They knew what kind of an impact it had on their lives. And obeying the truth in this sentence, right, in this verse, this is not a reference to obeying every command that was ever given. This is not a reference to obeying the entirety of the law or anything like that. The people that Peter was writing to would have known that the truth used like this was a reference to the fact that the resurrection had actually happened, right? And they anchored their faith, they anchored their lives to the reality that this event had taken place. And the result the result of letting what Jesus has done for us drive how we live our lives should be love for others. Love for others. And so here, right, in one sentence, he uses two different words, both of which, of course, we naturally translate as love. Because, it makes sense. That's what these words mean. But we do sort of lose a little something in it when we don't see what these words really are. But they are two different words that we translate as love. He says that this should result in a sincere or mutual brotherly love for each other. In fact, the way that he says that, right, and when he says that obeying the truth so that you have sincere love for each other, he's assuming that that's already happened. You have already established a sincere, mutual brotherly love for each other. And it should also cause us to love each other deeply from the heart. And that is where he uses a completely different word. They both mean love, but kind of two different types of love. And this word that is used in the second part, to love each other deeply from the heart, this is meant to elicit like the vision or the visual of an athlete straining their muscles, some stretching feat of athleticism in order to reach or attain their goal. To love each other from the very depths of our being. Because this is what spiritual maturity is. Spiritual depth and maturity is to love deeply. And in verse 23, he reminds us that the truth, the gospel of Jesus and his resurrection, is enduring and indestructible. And he actually quotes the prophet Isaiah in the next verse when he says, "For all people are like grass, and all their glory is like the flower of the fields. The grass withers, the flowers fall, but the word of the Lord endures forever." Everything in life, people, possessions, accomplishments, they will all fade away. For example, my dad, his favorite basketball player has always been Kareem, right? He always loved Kareem, and Kareem was the all-time leading scorer in all of NBA history. He scored more points than any other person that has ever played the game. In fact, my dad, being who he was, loved to make sure to point out to people that it wasn't, Michael Jordan who owned the scoring record. It was Kareem, because that was his favorite guy, and, Jordan is kind of referenced as the best to have ever played the game, but that's really kind of the point here, right? Even the best to have ever played the game did not own the scoring record. Kareem did. This was a record that not only held up for a long time, this was a record that for decades, most sports analysts and stuff like that didn't think that anyone would ever be able to come close to passing. But just recently, LeBron passed his all-time scoring record. And this is just another example that even the accomplishments that are supposed to outlive us eventually fade away. But the Word of God, the truth of the gospel of what Jesus did, it endures forever. Nothing can touch it. And nothing provides security, hope, and joy like something that is indestructible, right? And now at this point, after this quote from Isaiah, we actually have a chapter break. So it goes from chapter 1 to chapter 2. For reasons that I can't begin to explain, I am not scholarly enough to understand why a chapter break was placed here, because the first couple of verses of chapter 2 actually go right along with this topic. So I want to make sure that we take a look at that really quickly. So he refers back to where he started this idea in verse 22. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, he says, "Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind." Now, how are these things connected to verse 22? Well, if you love people deeply, then these things you cannot do. You just can't do them. Since you love each other deeply, and I mean, of course, naturally, we always do a really great job of that. Since we love each other deeply, since you have both a sincere family bond and a deep respect and appreciation for each other, you will get rid of these things. You'll have to. I mean, we have got to understand that malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander, they just don't work with family, do they? Because you can't love someone and delight in their pain. You can't love someone and deceive or act treacherously toward them. You can't love people and be fake and pretend to be something that you're not. You can't love someone but also despise whenever anything good happens to them. You can't love someone when you're talking bad about them to other people. These cannot coexist with someone who is purified with the truth. And unfortunately, you can't just say, well, you know what? I don't know if I want to be that person. That seems too hard. I don't want to do it. I don't know if I can live without my malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander. And hopefully, I mean, I know that it sounds ridiculous, right? But let's be honest, right? And please, don't raise your hands. Don't look at the person next to you. Don't be honest with me, but be honest with yourself. Are you really willing to completely give up delighting in the suffering of others and despising when good things happen to them? Are you really, really willing to completely give up being deceitful or hypocritical? Are you really willing to completely give up bad-mouthing other people? But this is where, and Peter sort of apologizes with like a sorry, not sorry kind of thing. I'll do the same thing because we can't go back. Now that you know, we can't unknow what we know. Malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander no longer work with the new people that our relationship with Jesus has made us to be. And so Peter then finishes this thought by saying that we ought to crave the truth and the pursuit of reflecting the characteristic of God's holiness. We ought to crave it. Verses 2 and 3, he says, like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. Now, this is something that I can talk about because I understand cravings. All right? Like right now, for instance, I am craving some Raising Cane's chicken fingers. It sounds really, really good. I'm so hungry. I'm also one of these people, I know that, and every once in a while, ice cream or chocolate sounds really, really good, but I don't, if anybody's with me, I'm one of these people that late at night, I just want a bag of chips, some pretzels, tortilla chips. I don't even need cheese or salsa or anything, just tortilla chips, salty snacks. I don't know if anybody else is like that. I'm like that. So I crave things like that late into the evening. But here's something that is actually probably a little bit closer to what Peter is describing here. When I was a kid, I played a lot of baseball, lots of baseball. And as you can tell, I was a fair-skinned redhead in the beating down hot sun of summer. So we did not play nicely together. Me and the sun did not. But I can remember, and I'm not honestly really even a big water drinker. I know I've kind of pushed myself lately to drink more water, but it's, I'm just not a big water drinker. But I can remember days coming off the field in 90-plus degree heat. It's Ohio, so it's 1,000,000% humidity. It's just hot. I can remember coming off the field on days like that, just craving water. Like drink an entire bottle, put an ice cold towel on my neck, dump water over my head kind of craving. There was a yearning, a longing for ice cold water, and nothing else could satisfy it. We should crave the truth. That is the type of craving that we should have to pursue and reflecting God's holiness, so that we will grow up. We will become mature. And Peter uses the imagery of an infant because you don't have to teach a child to want milk in order to survive, right? They just know instinctually that they need it and they crave it. And this type of craving, the craving that he's talking about here, is placed in direct contrast to malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander, which he tells us to get rid of. You will need to get rid of that stuff in order to replace it with a craving for the truth. You're not going to be able to have both. And then you can grow up. You will mature into someone who can actually hope fully and love deeply. I mean, imagine it. Imagine a world where Jesus followers are known for being like that. I mean, even if you're here today or you're watching or listening online and you're maybe skeptical. Maybe you're skeptical of Jesus and all the people that follow him. Maybe you're like, I'm still unsure about you guys. You seem like a bunch of strange folks. Even if you're skeptical of all of this, don't you think that people who love deeply and eliminate malice, deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander from their lives would have a tremendously positive impact on the culture, on their homes, on their families, on their workplaces, on their schools, on their community? I mean, heaven forbid, potentially on the world. I mean, look, you don't have to believe it all in order to know that that would be a good thing. But if you're willing to try it, right? If you try it, you'll find that when turbulence comes, you'll find yourself securely fastened to Jesus. And maybe you won't feel so tossed around like perhaps you have experienced at times in the past. Believe me when I tell you it's worth a try. So let me pray for us really quickly. God, I thank you so much for being here today. The opportunity to get together, to sing, to worship you. And we're so grateful, we're so thankful for everything that you have done for us. Sacrifices that you've made for us. The unbelievable amount of patience that you have for us. God, we're definitely not perfect at this. There's no question about that. But in order to be able to really put our hope completely in you and not a little bit in ourselves and not a little bit in other things, we understand that we're going to need to put aside some of these other characteristics and attributes that are not in alignment with who you are. And that's going to be hard. God, it's going to be hard. We need your help. We can't do it on our own. We're going to need encouragement from each other. We're going to need people who are patient around us, people who are willing to say, hey, look, that wasn't right, but you know what? I still love you anyways. God, help us to be a group of people that is defined that way. God, we love you. We want to be good reflections of who you are. We want to bear your image well. Help us to do that. It's in Jesus' name that I pray.